Hello and welcome to another review of a film that I'm seeing on Mubi. This time I'm reviewing the documentary This Much I Know to Be True, directed by Andrew Dominik. Now this is a documentary about Nick Cave, and we can already know that there's a companion documentary made by the same director in 2016, One More Time. And I hadn't seen that before, so I decided to go back and watch that as well. So I've actually seen two documentaries about Nick Cave. And also in the past year, I've seen the Sparks Brothers documentary by Edgar Wright and the Get Back documentary about the Beatles by Peter Jackson. And I think these are quite interesting comparisons because all three of these documentaries are music documentaries, but they all do something quite different. Now, just talking about this documentary, This Much I Know to Be True, it is mostly music. It is like a beautifully produced music video of many Nick Cave songs, the more recent songs. It's highly staged. It's beautifully shot. The light is incredible. There's a real drama to the way the camera moves and the light. There's flashes of almost white light moments. It's really well done, and there's really interesting angles, and the camera's moving, and there's a circular railway around the musicians so that the camera can move smoothly around. It's really well done. Now, I think your attitude to this documentary depends on how much you like Nick Cave music, because there is, the bulk of the film, really, I'd say 80 to 90% is a recording of the music. Now, Nick Cave's music is not to my personal taste. I find it dreary, uninspiring, and even pretentious, and I've never really liked it. Now, I know people who are big Nick Cave fans, and so these things are down to taste. I think if you're a Nick Cave fan, this film must be amazing. As I say, I went back and watched the other documentary from 2016, One More Time, and I think actually the two documentaries make more sense seen as a two-parter. So I'm not really that interested in Nick Cave to want to watch two documentaries, but I do think to really appreciate and understand this current documentary, This Much I Know to Be True, it does make sense to see it as a two-parter. What can I say that's good about this? It's not a conventional documentary, like, for example, the Sparks Brothers, which is, a really nicely done documentary, but it's a linear narrative of the Sparks career, and there's lots of talking heads, lots of people talking about how great they are, and the kind of history. So that's kind of one type, the more conventional documentary. The other type, kind of fly on the wall, the Peter Jackson Get Back 8-hour marathon documentary about the Beatles, is just the camera's there, just watching what's going on. There's not really any editing. It's just recording the creative process. This documentary is very different than either of those. This is very deliberate, it's stylized, it's really cinematic. It's definitely not natural or spontaneous. And in some ways, I think it makes this is more of an artwork than either of those other documentaries. It's actually much more creative the way it was made. It's been made. It's certainly not a conventional documentary. Another merit of this is having seen the two films and spent more time with Nick Cave in Nick Cave's world than I have before, is that I kind of wonder how much he the image he presents is the real him, whether his whole life is a performance. I mean, his look's pretty amazing, actually. He's really distinctive. That kind of gothic, depressive, black look that he has. It's a really strong image. And, you know, I do just wonder whether his whole life is a performance. I think certainly in terms of this documentary and the previous one, they can be seen as a performance. You know, they do feel like they are very deliberate and every shot is planned. There's no just spontaneous conversation. So in that way, it is a performance. Another good thing about this film is some of the music actually is, at least in terms of my taste and his music, I think some of the more recent music is actually his best. I really, really enjoyed the track Hand of God. And with the dramatic way in which it's shot, with the use of light, as I said, that's quite a spectacle. I've watched that several times. And the other track that's really good is White Elephant. So there are a couple of tracks that I enjoyed, and actually I definitely will be listening out for any future Nick Cave music. Whether I'll like it or not, I don't know that I can go that far. But and the other thing that's interesting, and actually I seem to be saying a lot of things about it that are interesting, is that, you know, there's a real sense with Nick Cave, and this may be part of the performance, that he lives in the negative and the positive, the kind of really pessimistic, but there's an underlying optimism as well. You know, the kind of evil and the spiritual. So there's a sense there's a real sense of that in this documentary. One thing I would have liked to see more in both of the documentaries is more of the creative process. The thing I loved about Get Back, the Beatles documentary, was we see them, you know, just playing around and creating the process of creating these songs which become iconic. I just thought that was a really beautiful thing to do, to see the birth of some of these iconic Beatles songs. And I don't feel like in either of these Nick Cave documentaries that we actually see any of his creative process. There's a couple of scenes where he's talking with his collaborator Warren Ellis, and they seem to be in the creative mode. But in every case, there's always music printed. They're always talking about the tracks which have already been created. I would be really interested to see more of their creative process, and I'm really interested in Warren Ellis because I'd never heard of Warren Ellis before. He's Nick Cave's long-term collaborator, but we see Warren a lot in this documentary and the previous one, and it seems clear that he's the really creative one in terms of you know, being experimental, trying different instruments. I mean, if I was going to be a bit severe on Nick Cave's work, it's like, to the extent that the music is good, that's been created by Warren Ellis, and then Nick Cave just superimposes his depressive lyrics on top of it. That's maybe a bit harsh, but I think it's really interesting to know a bit more about Warren Ellis. And when we do see him quite a lot in the film, in the documentary, but I'd like to know more about that. So in conclusion, this film, this much I know to be true, is it's a music video, really. And if you like Nick Cave's music, you're going to love this film. As I say, I think it makes most sense if you see it as a two-parter, and also if you see the whole thing as a kind of performance, an artwork. Of the two documentaries, I think it is worth just saying this, that the first one More Time, I think is actually the better documentary. You learn a little bit more about Nick Cave in that. And of course, that documentary was made not long after the death of one of Nick Cave's children. And so there is something, regardless of whether the whole thing is a performance, there is an authentic fact in this that is being addressed, grappled with in the documentary. So this is not just about the music, and I think there's a bit more talking, and so it's a little bit more interesting if you were just going to watch one of the two documentaries. On the other hand, the fact that there's more talking, there's more pretension. I do find Nick Cave it's slightly odd, because sometimes the lyrics and his poetry are really interesting, but other times it just seems to drift into pretension really quickly. I think the key issue in the end is whether you like his music or not, or whether you like his ability as a writer or a poet. He's won me over a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to become a big fan. Next time I'm going to be reviewing the film Benedetta, directed by Paul Verhoeven. See you next time.